Welcome, listeners, to a dark journey back to a memory that has haunted me for over 3 decades, when a simple game turned into a living nightmare. It happened 30 years ago in Pine Ridge, a secluded township surrounded by dense marshlands and overgrown bulrushes, a tall wetland vegetation that choked the dirt roads. Our tight-knit childhood group of 8 guys spent every evening at Adrian's house, a spacious wooden property bordered by deep woods. On weekends, we gathered at the thicket, a clearing inside a massive reed patch where Adrian and Nathan, our oldest friend, found a colossal ancient tree reachable only by crawling through a narrow tunnel. During a chilly December twilight, looking for a thrill, I suggested playing The Spirit of the Glasses, a localized DIY variation of the Ouija board. In this game, players create a handmade letterboard using an upturned shot glass to channel spiritual forces. We set up the board in Adrian's yard around 6 in the evening. We randomly picked a deceased person's name from a newspaper obituary, a victim of a car crash, and chanted an invocation. However, the glass remained motionless. Elliot realized we were sitting directly in front of Adrian's family guardian shrine, a protective home altar erected to honor the spirits of the land, which creates a spiritual shield, barring outside entities from entering the property. We moved to a dark crossroads, a 4-way dirt intersection just outside the boundary line. In folklore, crossroads possess a thin veil where the physical and supernatural worlds intersect, making them magnets for wandering souls. Under a single dim light bulb on a pole, Nathan suggested calling a restless child spirit who had suffered a violent, sudden death, an entity known as a vengeful, sudden death spirit, trapped in the physical world with volatile malice. Just then, Carter, our hot-tempered friend, arrived on his bicycle and loudly demanded to join, taking Nathan's place. With Nathan chanting for us, we asked if the entity had arrived. Suddenly, the glass slid with unnatural force, stopping dead on. Yes! When Ray asked how it died, the glass glided across the letters, spelling M-U-R-D-E-R-E-D. Suddenly, the shot glass began spinning counterclockwise, accelerating to an impossible velocity until it abruptly darted across the board, spelling, "You all must die." Infuriated, Carter violently slammed his heavy silver holy amulet, a protective religious medallion, onto the board, shattering the glass. Carter screamed curses into the dark woods, daring the entity to face him. In our panic, we never properly performed the dismissal ritual to send the spirit back, leaving the door wide open. Later that night, while walking near the woods, an invisible force slammed violently against my throat like a wire, throwing me backward. My friends laughed, pointing out a bare wire clothesline, but Owen noticed a deep red welt encircling my neck. The horror turned real the next afternoon. Peter rode up, his face pale, and delivered the shocking news. Carter had hanged himself in his room. Refusing to believe it, Nathan and I rushed to the local clinic. There, we found Carter's body on a gurney. Wrapped tightly around his neck was a horrific, deep-grooved laceration that looked as if a heavy, twisted fabric rope had cut straight into his flesh, an injury that perfectly mirrored the phantom strangulation I had felt the night before. This was only the beginning of a horrific debt our circle would be forced to pay. Following the horrific discovery of Carter's lifeless body at the clinic, a crushing weight descended upon our group. My eyes were glued to his face. His tongue protruded slightly between his teeth, a gruesome side effect of asphyxiation, a medical state where the body is severely deprived of oxygen, leading to unconsciousness or death. But what made my blood run entirely cold was his neck. There was no rope left. Yet a brutal, deeply grooved laceration was carved into his flesh, looking as though a heavy fabric cord had been twisted and pulled with supernatural force, tearing through the skin until fatty tissue and dark blood seeped out. It perfectly mirrored the phantom wire strangulation I had felt the previous evening. As the rest of our circle, Adrian, Elliot, Owen, and Ray, arrived at the clinic, the reality of losing our 16-year-old best friend threw us into absolute shock. We spent the next 7 days attending his funeral, helping his family serve refreshments to the mourners while trying to comprehend the tragedy. It was during the wake that Carter's young wife and aunt revealed a sinister secret. This wasn't his first attempt. Carter had secretly tried to hang himself twice before, but his father had caught him both times, slicing the rope just in time. On his third and final attempt, his father was away at work. Carter had locked his bedroom door, something he never did, and shortly after, his wife heard a rhythmic, frantic thumping against the wall. She tried desperately to force the door open, but by the time she breached it, he was already gone. On the 7th and final night of the funeral, a deeply ingrained cultural anxiety took hold of us. In our folklore, the 3rd and 7th nights after a sudden death are known as the spirit's return, a superstitious window where a newly deceased soul wanders back to the physical world, often visiting the places and people they frequented in life. Terrified of being visited alone, none of us dared to return to our own homes. We agreed to sleep at Adrian's house, piling all 6 of us onto his massive wooden bed. The atmosphere inside the room was thick with unexpressed dread. Around 11 o'clock, someone broke the fragile silence, whispering, "Do you think Carter will come looking for us tonight?" The moment those words left his lips, a violent, unnatural gust of wind violently slammed the wooden window shutters open. Adrian's room overlooked the entire desolate dirt road leading back to Carter's neighborhood. Suddenly, the local stray dogs began to howl. It didn't start near us. The howling began faintly at Carter's distant house, then moved like a wave, pack by pack, descending down the road in a chilling, deliberate progression that perfectly tracked the movement of an invisible entity walking directly toward us. Finally, the dogs stationed right in Adrian's yard erupted into a synchronized, frantic weeping beneath our window. We huddled together in sheer terror, praying silently, while Nathan remained completely stoic. He scolded us, saying, "Why are you huddling over me? He was our brother, and he loved us. Why are you terrified of him?" But I knew the truth. Carter was volatile and aggressive in life, and whatever was walking outside our window was no longer just our friend. It was an unhinged, vengeful presence born from a shattered ritual. We endured that psychological torture until 4 in the morning, only drifting into a fitful sleep when sheer exhaustion finally claimed our minds. After the chilling night at Adrian's house, the overwhelming terror slowly faded into a dull, lingering ache. We desperately tried to bury the memory of the ritual and return to our normal routines. Sometime later, I ran into Carter's father, who shared a bizarre piece of closure. He had traveled out of town to consult a spiritual seer, a clairvoyant medium who reads a person's life energies and cosmic destiny. The seer revealed a chilling truth. A dark, fatal omen had marked their household that year. If Carter hadn't died, his father would have been taken instead. Because Carter unintentionally traded his life to absorb the tragic fate, the seer claimed the father would now live a remarkably long, healthy life. Strangely enough, it proved true. The old man remains incredibly robust to this day, working demanding construction jobs without a single ailment. At the time, we tried to accept this as a comforting explanation, completely unaware that the entity we provoked was merely biding its time. Over the next 2 years, the remaining members of our circle began to drift apart as adulthood beckoned. I moved across the state to attend a prestigious fine arts academy, living in a crowded college dormitory and immersing myself in my studies. Meanwhile, Nathan and Adrian attended a local vocational institute. Our daily gatherings at the thicket became a thing of the past, and we had to rely on rare holiday breaks and landline phones, the stationary, wired-home telephone networks of that era, just to keep in touch. The silence was broken during a long winter holiday, when Adrian's father, Uncle Gilbert, summoned us all back to Pine Ridge. He proudly announced that Adrian was preparing for an ordination ceremony, a sacred spiritual rite of passage where a young man shaves his head, dons holy robes, and takes solemn monastic vows to live a life of purity. In our folklore, this act generates immense spiritual merit capable of cleansing negative karma and shielding a person from malicious supernatural forces. We were thrilled for him, viewing it as a beautiful new beginning that would finally wash away the lingering stains of our past recklessness. I promised to stay in town to help distribute the invitation cards and prepare for the upcoming holy celebration. The evening before the ceremony, I took a commuter motorcycle taxi back into our old neighborhood. As we navigated the winding dirt road, I saw Adrian riding his motorcycle in the opposite direction. True to his naturally proud, aloof character, Adrian didn't pull over or yell out a joyful greeting. Instead, he just cocked his head slightly, flashed his signature, cool smirk, and cruised past. I smiled, thinking we would catch up fully at the ceremony. The next morning, at exactly 6:30, the sharp, violent ringing of the landline phone shattered the morning silence. My mother answered it, her face turning pale as she handed the receiver to me, saying Nathan was on the line. Groggy and confused, I took the phone. Nathan was the oldest and most serious member of our group, never one for casual morning chats or foolish pranks. Before I could even say hello, Nathan's voice cut through the line, cold and entirely hollow. He said, "You need to get to Adrian's house immediately. Adrian is dead." I stood frozen, my mind completely rejecting the information. I laughed nervously, telling him it was a sick joke because I had just seen Adrian riding his bike the previous evening. But Nathan didn't argue. He simply repeated the words in that dead, flat tone and hung up. Panic seized my chest. I threw on my shoes and sprinted out into the freezing morning fog, racing toward the house that had once been our sanctuary, terrified of the nightmare that was waiting for me. I ran through the dense, biting morning fog, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I sprinted toward Adrian's house. The quiet dirt road felt endlessly long, but as I rounded the final bend, my heart sank. Parked in the yard was a dark medical response van, a designated county coroner vehicle used to transport the deceased. A few neighbors stood and whispered conversations on the lawn, their faces grim. From inside, the muffled, agonizing shouts of Uncle Gilbert echoed through the walls. I pushed past the door, my mind spinning in utter confusion. The moment Uncle Gilbert saw me walk in, he stumbled down the stairs. He was always the neighborhood comedian, a man who cracked jokes to diffuse any tense situation. But today, his attempt at humor was heartbreaking. His voice trembled violently, cracking under the weight of unshed tears as he forced a hollow, shaking smile. He looked at me and said, "John, you're finally here. Go upstairs and tell your friend to get up. He's been sleeping far too long today, that lazy boy. Go wake him up for me." His words shattered me. He was desperately clinging to denial, his fatherly instincts short-circuiting from the trauma. I passed Adrian's sisters on the stairs. They couldn't look at me, their faces stained with tears, while his mother sat in the living room, staring blankly at the wall, slowly shaking her head in total disbelief. The laughter-filled home we grew up in had been swallowed by death. I walked up the creaking wooden steps to the second floor, arriving at the very bedroom where we had all piled together into one bed after Carter's funeral. The doorway was partially blocked by two emergency responders packing up their trauma kits. One of them turned around, and I recognized him. He was a former elementary school classmate of ours. He looked at me with deep pity, sighed heavily, and quietly muttered, "He's gone, John. We did everything we could, but we were too late." I stepped into the room and my eyes fell upon Adrian. He was lying flat on his back, looking exactly as if he had just drifted off to sleep. At the foot of his bed, a retro home video game console was still plugged into the television. A pair of plastic controllers lying carelessly on the mattress beside half-empty soda bottles and scattered snack wrappers. Everything looked normal, except for his hands. I stepped closer and reached out to touch his arm. His skin was already growing stiff and radiating a deep, unnatural chill. His fingernails had turned a stark, bruised shade of cyanosis, a distinct medical discoloration where the lack of circulating oxygen causes the extremities to turn a dark, haunting blue-black. Uncle Gilbert crept up behind me, tears finally spilling over his eyelids as he frantically repeated his manic pleas, shouting at Adrian to stop playing tricks and wake up. The invitations for his holy ordination ceremony were still stacked neatly on his desk, completely useless. The celebration meant to bring blessings and cleanse our past had transformed into a horrific wake, making us realize with absolute certainty that the entity from the Crossroads had returned to collect its next soul. The joyous preparations for the ordination ceremony were instantly replaced by the grim realities of an unexpected funeral, trapping our circle in an agonizing sense of repetition. As we gathered at Adrian's wake, the local villagers could only whisper one phrase to explain his sudden demise: Lai Tai. In our regional folklore, Lai Tai refers to sudden unexpected death syndrome, a terrifying phenomenon where a healthy individual, typically a young male, goes to sleep and never wakes up, as if their soul was quietly harvested. In medical terms, it is often classified as acute heart failure or Brugada syndrome, but to us, it felt like an invisible execution. I sat with the guys, trying to rationalize the tragedy through a logical lens. Adrian was an incredibly large, tall, and heavily built guy. Every time our circle gathered to drink, he would walk over cradling massive bottles of sodas and bags of junk food. He would guard them, half joking, "This is mine, nobody touch it!" Ray, who loved pushing his buttons, would always sneak over and steal his snacks just to watch him frown. Thinking back, I convinced myself that his sudden death was triggered by these intense nocturnal eating habits, perhaps a severe spike in blood pressure or an undiagnosed cardiac condition. We desperately clung to this explanation, eager to believe our past actions had nothing to do with it. But that fragile comfort was utterly shattered when Todd arrived at the wake. Todd had been drifting away from our core group, but he walked up to us with a deeply unsettled look. He leaned in and whispered, "Guys, this makes no sense. I saw Adrian this morning at 7 o'clock. I stared at him, my heart dropping. I grabbed Todd's shoulder and said, "What are you talking about?" I went to his house after Nathan called me, and he was already dead by 6:30. Todd's face drained of color, but he insisted aggressively, "I swear to you, I saw him. He was standing right in front of the grocery store, holding a bag of snacks, casually swinging his leg, and he gave me that signature, arrogant nod to greet me as I walked past." A suffocating silence fell over our group as we exchanged terrified glances. We realized with absolute horror that Adrian's spirit likely didn't even comprehend that he had died, his phantom essence still reenacting his daily morning routine while his physical body lay cold on the mattress. Adrian was gone, leaving another empty space in our shattered circle. Another year and a half slowly bled away, and the terrifying memories of Pine Ridge began to blur into the background as the demands of survival took over. I plunged headfirst into the music scene, working as a night shift vocalist. I didn't have a record label yet, so I had to hustle hard, performing at 3 different venues across the city in a single night, driving my old car completely alone down desolate highways between midnight and dawn, unaware that my own date with the entity was fast approaching. Another year and a half drifted past, during which I threw myself into my musical career, desperate to escape the shadows of Pine Ridge. One evening, Nathan unexpectedly showed up at my house. His face was entirely devoid of expression as he looked at me and said, "John, we need to go visit Oliver tonight." The moment he uttered those words, a familiar icy grip seized my chest. A dark wave of dread washed over me, and I couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong with him, Nathan? Please don't tell me it's happening again." Oliver was Adrian's cousin and one of the gentlest souls in our childhood circle. He barely ever spoke. We used to hear the melancholic strumming of his acoustic guitar far more than we ever heard his voice. He had a permanent limp in his left leg due to an iatrogenic injury, a specific medical term denoting an illness or physical impairment inadvertently caused by a physician's medical treatment or incorrect injection. Years ago, a local clinic doctor had mistakenly injected a needle directly into his major nerve cluster during a sports injury therapy session, leaving him partially crippled. Oliver never filed a lawsuit or complained. He was simply too gentle to cause trouble for anyone. Nathan, Elliot, and I gathered at dusk to make the journey to Oliver's house, which was isolated at the absolute dead end of a desolate rural lane. Back then, this area bordered the massive, overgrown Blackwood citrus orchards, entirely disconnected from the main roads. The path was a treacherous, unpaved dirt track shrouded in absolute darkness, forcing us to rely on primitive, dim plastic flashlights to navigate the twisted roots and muddy ditches. When we finally arrived at the property, we were greeted by his anxious aunt. She pointed toward the dark space beneath their traditional stilt house, a regional architectural style where the living quarters are elevated on tall wooden pillars, leaving an open-air ground floor underneath. In the shadows, a single, pale yellow incandescent bulb hung precariously over a massive, grimy mosquito net. His aunt whispered tearfully, "He's inside the net. He hasn't eaten a single bite in days. Please, try to talk some sense into him." We stepped into the damp, shadowy undercroft, the heavy silence broken only by the chirping of nocturnal insects. I approached the mesh fabric and called out quietly, "Oliver? Hey man, it's us. Are you awake in there?" Inside the dim enclosure, we heard a faint, agonizingly slow rustling. Then a voice emerged, but it didn't sound like Oliver at all. It was a hollow, scraping rasp, completely stripped of any human warmth or vitality, whispering, "You guys actually came." As the heavy fabric of the mosquito net began to slowly pull back, a wave of pure horror rippled through us, freezing the breath inside our throats at the sight of what lay waiting within. As the heavy mesh of mosquito net parted, the pale yellow bulb illuminated a sight that instantly shattered our composure. Oliver was completely unrecognizable. His body had withered into an absolute skeletal frame, his skin stretched so incredibly thin and translucent over his bones that it resembled parchment paper wrapped around a corpse. But it was his face that made my heart violently seize. His eyelids seemed entirely retracted, causing his eyeballs to protrude grotesquely out of their sockets like white ping-pong balls, a severe physical manifestation akin to extreme exophthalmos, a distinct medical state where the eyeballs bulge abnormally forward from the orbital cavities due to severe tissue wasting or trauma. His pupils darted erratically from left to right, entirely unfocused, yet he forced a terrifying hollow grin on seeing us. Tears instantly spilled down my cheeks. The sheer psychological weight of seeing our vibrant childhood friend reduced to this monstrous state left Elliot and Nathan completely paralyzed with fear. Desperate to break the suffocating dread, I forced a shaky smile and intentionally shifted the conversation to his passion, asking if he was still practicing his guitar. Oliver's head tilted abnormally as he rasped, "I don't have the strength anymore, John. It feels too heavy." The profound despair in his voice cut through me. Remembering the bag I carried, I eagerly told him that I had brought a demo tape, a preliminary rough audio recording used by unsigned musicians to showcase their tracks before studio production of my new band. His errant eyes suddenly locked onto me with a flicker of genuine excitement, and he pleaded to hear it. We looked around the dark undercroft and spotted a dusty, ancient portable radio receiver, an early generation sound system that operated purely on heavy-duty dry cell batteries rather than electrical outlets. With trembling, sweat-slicked hands, I jammed the cassette into the deck, wiped my tears, and pressed play. As the rough rock melody filled the damp night air, Oliver sat perfectly still, his bulging eyes staring intently into the dark, completely immersed in the sound. For a few brief minutes, the horrific atmosphere dissolved into a beautiful memory of our youth. When the tape ended, he smiled softly and whispered that the track was beautiful. I choked back a sob, promising to get him a VIP ticket to our first major concert the moment he recovered. But Oliver simply stared at the ceiling, his voice dropping into a hollow whisper as he replied, "I won't be able to make it, John. My journey ends here." Sensing his fading energy, Nathan quietly nudged me, signaling that we should let him rest. We said our final goodbyes, stepped out into the pitch-black Blackwood orchard, and wept uncontrollably as we walked back. 2 days later, the landline rang once again. Oliver was dead. Gathering at Oliver's wake felt like stepping into an echo chamber of our own unresolved trauma. We sat in the heavy silence, staring at the small wooden casket, desperately needing to understand how a gentle soul could wither away so violently. I pulled aside his maternal aunt, the woman who had looked after him ever since his grandmother passed away. With bloodshot eyes, she revealed that Oliver's spirit had been broken long before his body gave out. His permanent limp, caused by the past iatrogenic nerve damage, had made him an easy target for malicious relatives who lived nearby. They constantly harassed him, loudly fabricating rumors that he was a substance abuser, a drug addict whose physical impairment was the result of illicit drug abuse rather than a tragic medical error. While his grandmother was alive, she shielded him fiercely from their cruelty. But after her passing, Oliver was left entirely defenseless. Whenever he limped out of the house carrying his guitar to find us, our circle had already scattered across the state. He would return to the dark undercroft completely alone, only to face another barrage of verbal abuse. Eventually, he withdrew from the world entirely, crawling inside his mosquito net and refusing to swallow a single bite of food. His aunt softly called it tram jai tai, a localized psychological term translating to pining to death or dying of a broken heart, a profound state of emotional despair where an individual completely loses the will to live, systematically rejecting all sustenance until the body succumbs to self-induced starvation. She told us she often found him quietly weeping in the dark, calling out for his grandmother, until his organs simply ceased to function. We wept for him, trying to find solace in the fact that his suffering was over, completely terrified by the grim tally of our shattered group. 2 more years slipped into the past. We were all completely consumed by the relentless grind of adulthood. I was working steadily as a late-night club vocalist, rushing between different venues to make a living. One chilly evening, I was scheduled for a midnight set at a rock lounge located near a major northern highway intersection. Unlike my usual solitary night drives, my girlfriend, Jane, decided to join me, wanting to sit in the audience and hear my new set list. We cruised down the open road at around 90 kilometers per hour, sharing casual conversation. As we approached a massive horseshoe flyover, a sweeping, elevated concrete overpass designed to allow fast-moving vehicles to execute a seamless U-turn above heavy highway traffic, the peaceful night was instantly shattered. A deafening, explosive metallic crunch echoed from the top of the ramp, and a thick, choking cloud of white smoke violently billowed into the air directly in our path. The blinding cloud of white smoke enveloped my windshield, and within a split second, a multi-car pileup materialized directly ahead. 2 vehicles were spinning out of control across the asphalt lane, throwing up sparks. Driving at nearly 90 kilometers per hour, I had mere fractions of a second to make a life-or-death choice. Swerving left was impossible. A mangled car blocked the shoulder. I violently yanked the steering wheel to the right, hoping to clear the wreckage, but it was too late. Another vehicle, spun by the initial impact, whipped around sideways and slammed with catastrophic force into the passenger side of my car. Instinct overtook terror. I threw my arm across the console, lunging over Jane to shield her head with my body as the world erupted into a roar of twisting metal and shattering glass. The violent deployment of the airbags filled the cabin with white powder, and the world went black. When I forced my eyes open, Jane was dazed, suffering from severe vertigo. I fought my way past the deflated airbags and forced the jammed door open, stepping out into the chaotic debris field. Through the haze, I spotted the car that had struck us. A young woman was slumped over the wheel, crying out in agony as blood poured down her face. Seeing smoke pouring from her engine bay, I limped over, hoisted her into my arms, and carried her across the highway lanes, laying her safely on the embankment. Once the ambulance arrived, I called my band's lead guitarist to pick me up so we could still perform our late-night set. The adrenaline kept the terror at bay, and I convinced myself that we had simply survived a random piece of bad luck. The true horror didn't drop until late the next morning. My home landline phone rang, and a trembling female voice introduced herself as Chloe, an old acquaintance from our teenage years. She asked frantically if I was alive. When I told her about the highway crash, she broke down into hysterical tears, sobbing apologies over the line. She told me that 2 days prior, she had visited a highly respected spiritual seer named Evelyn. During the reading, Evelyn had suddenly stopped, describing a man whose appearance, career, and vehicle matched me exactly. The seer had commanded Chloe to find my number and deliver an immediate warning. I had reached my chungkat. In our traditional beliefs, chungkat refers to a critical fatal threshold, a spiritual cosmic low point, where a person's protective aura completely dissipates, leaving them profoundly vulnerable to fatal accidents or predatory entities looking to harvest their soul. The seer explicitly warned that if I drove completely alone at night, I would certainly die. Chloe had found my number but forgot to call me until it was almost too late. My blood ran cold as I realized that if Jane hadn't randomly decided to join me that night, I would have been completely alone on that flyover, and the entity would have collected its third debt. Still shaken by Chloe's frantic phone call, I knew I couldn't ignore the seer's warning. I desperately needed to see this woman, Evelyn, face to face. I reached out to Elliot, and together we drove down to the old Riverside district, navigating a maze of grim, gray concrete apartment blocks to find her residence. We climbed the dark, echoing stairwell to the third floor. When the heavy wooden door clicked open, a middle-aged woman dressed in pure white robes greeted us. Evelyn radiated an immense, calming aura, a radiant, serene spiritual presence that felt profoundly sacred and pure. She stood perfectly still, staring at me from head to toe, her eyes suddenly freezing on the empty air directly behind my shoulders. Before we could even step inside, she spoke in a soft, chilling tone. "Only the two of you may enter. Tell the third one behind you to stay outside. He is absolutely not welcome in my home." My blood turned to ice. I spun around, seeing absolutely nothing but the empty, dimly lit hallway. But Elliot's face had gone completely pale. It wasn't until weeks later that Elliot confessed to me that he had been catching glimpses of a distorted, pitch-black silhouette trailing closely behind me ever since the highway crash, but he had been too terrified to speak it aloud. We stepped inside and sat down on the floor of Evelyn's room, the thick scent of burning sandalwood filling the air. She looked deeply into my eyes and asked if I still revered the sacred protector medallion, a blessed religious icon representing the patron saint of creators and travelers that I had formally received during a holy initiation ritual at the Fine Arts Academy years ago. I lowered my head in shame, admitting that I hadn't offered a single prayer or thought to the icon in years, completely consumed by the chaotic lifestyle of late-night club performances. Evelyn reached into a small wooden box, pulled out a heavy, blessed iron medallion, and placed it firmly into my palm, instructing me that its spiritual shield would be my only defense. Then, she slowly closed her eyes, entering a deep clairvoyant trance. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room, making it hard to breathe. When she finally opened her eyes, her gaze was piercing and devoid of fear. She looked directly past my shoulder and whispered, "What forbidden game did you boys play? A very large, heavily built young man is standing right behind you, his arms crossed, staring through the back of your head with an absolute burning fury." The vivid description hit me like a physical blow. There was no doubt about it. Adrian had come to collect me. The seer's voice cut through the heavy smell of sandalwood like a cold blade, revealing that Adrian's spirit was anchored right behind me. Evelyn closed her eyes tightly once more, sinking deeper into her clairvoyant state as she channeled the unseen energies lingering around our group. She breathed heavily, her fingers twitching against her white robes. When she opened her eyes again, a grim look of profound concern washed over her face. She looked at Elliot and me, letting out a long, ragged sigh that made our hearts plunge into a bottomless pit of despair. The absolute hopelessness radiating from her eyes was enough to let us know that we were dealing with something far worse than a single disgruntled spirit. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into a tense whisper as she said, "I can see the large young man clearly, but honestly, he is not the one who concerns me the most right now. I am looking past him, and there is another entity far deeper in the shadows that fills me with true dread. I can barely bring myself to look at it for long. It is consumed by an absolute, terrifying malice, and it hates your circle with every ounce of its existence." A suffocating quiet fell over the room as Elliot and I tried to process her words, our minds racing with terrifying questions. Finally, Elliot gathered the courage to voice the confusion that had been bothering us for years. He looked at Evelyn and asked, "But how is this possible, ma'am? If this truly stems from the forbidden board game we played as teenagers, why did it travel so far?" The accident that took the child's life happened miles away in the bustling northern district of New Richmond, yet our old neighborhood, Pine Ridge, is located completely across the river in the southern marshlands. How could a spirit cross such a massive distance just to stalk a group of teenage boys? Evelyn shook her head slowly, a grim smile playing on her lips. She looked at us with deep pity and replied, "You boys are incredibly naive. What makes you so entirely certain that the entity you summoned that evening was actually the child's spirit from the newspaper obituary?" Her question struck us like a physical blow, leaving us completely speechless as the realization washed over us. Evelyn leaned in closer, explaining the true mechanics of our past mistake. She rasped, "When you perform an invocation without using a specific birth name or a direct bloodline link, your call echoes out into the spiritual void as a wide-open invitation. You did not summon a specific soul, you opened a doorway. A wandering, malevolent entity that had been haunting those dark crossroads for decades simply intercepted your call, seizing the chance to manifest. And when your hot-tempered friend Carter violently slammed his heavy iron amulet onto the board to shatter the shot glass, he didn't banish the presence. In our folklore, doing that without a formal banishment ritual acts as an act of spiritual binding, a violent containment that permanently locked the entity's rage onto your physical life forces. It became a spiritual anchor, trapping it inside your circle. You didn't just invite a guest into your house, you locked a furious, vengeful predator inside the room with you, and it has spent the last few years systematically tearing your lives apart from the inside out." The weight of Evelyn's revelation hung in the air, a suffocating presence that made our childhood circle look like a line of condemned men. She explained that Adrian wasn't acting out of hatred or spite. Rather, his spirit had been violently hijacked by the Crossroads entity. Because Adrian had died under highly irregular, sudden circumstances, his soul was held in a state of continuous bondage, controlled like a puppet by the primary entity to serve as a beacon to lure the rest of us. He wasn't seeking revenge, he was simply lonely, longing to drag his closest friends into the afterlife so we could be together forever in that eternal cold. The true, ancient malice belonged entirely to the Crossroads entity, which was waiting for our life energies to hit rock bottom. Evelyn looked at us with deep concern and asked, "Do any of you recognize the exact location where this entity resides?" She closed her eyes once more, describing the environment shifting inside her mind. She breathed in deeply and whispered, "I see the absolute dead end of a desolate, unpaved lane. It is completely engulfed in darkness, with no artificial streetlights. There is a primitive wooden bridge built directly over a stagnant, murky creek surrounded by thick, overgrown brush. Right at the edge of this concrete pathway, rising directly out of the black water, is a colossal weeping tree, its heavy, tangled roots wrapping around the bank like grasping claws." The vivid details instantly triggered a memory. Before I could speak, Todd gasped loudly, his voice trembling in realization. Todd was like our local walking map, a guy who knew every hidden path and shortcut in Pine Ridge. He shouted, "I know exactly where that is. It's the old concrete footbridge at the end of the lane where the motorcycles can only pass one at a time. If two bikes meet, one has to tilt sideways against the overgrown brush just to let the other squeeze through." A chilling wave of electricity rippled through my body. The description was absolutely flawless. Evelyn opened her eyes and said, "Now that you have identified the primary anchor, you must go there to perform a placating ritual. You need to construct a San Fiang Taa temporary spirit shrine built on stilts exactly at eye level with the living, erected as a neutral altar to offer peace offerings and formal apologies to displaced souls. But hear me well, you must execute this exclusively during the daytime. The moment the sun dips below the horizon, you must stay completely away from that bridge, or the entity will harvest you all." Elliot looked terrified, realizing he had almost been trapped in the orbit of that cursed footbridge, while Nathan simply stared ahead, his face hard and completely determined to end the curse once and for all. Leaving Evelyn's apartment, the heavy weight of our dark destiny felt completely set in stone. Nathan immediately took charge, his face an unreadable mask as he looked at me and said, "We need to gather everyone who is left and build this temporary spirit shrine before it's too late. I'll get Todd and Elliot." I asked if we should look for Ray, but Nathan shook his head, explaining that Ray had suddenly packed his bags and moved out of state months ago, completely dropping out of contact. The lack of cell phones in that era made tracking him down absolutely impossible. We agreed to gather at 6 in the evening on a dry autumn day. Nathan was exceptionally skilled with his hands, having spent his youth working alongside his father as a traditional joiner, a highly skilled woodworker who specializes in building structural wooden frames, joints, and furniture from raw timber without using modern metal brackets. He took charge of preparing the heavy lumber, cutting solid structural timber posts to support the altar. Elliot was a local trade apprentice, helping to measure and saw the baseboards, while I assisted by carrying tools and mixing the bonding mixtures. We loaded the wooden pieces onto our motorbikes, our hearts beating in synchronized panic as the shadows began to stretch across the neighborhood. We navigated the winding lane until we reached the dead end, arriving at the old concrete footbridge. The environment was an exact match to the terrifying image Evelyn had channeled. To our left stood the grim, abandoned concrete brick wall of a defunct factory, overgrown with creeping ivy. Directly ahead lay the narrow concrete slab bridge suspended over the stagnant, ink-black creek, its surface choked with foul debris. And to our right, Rising like a twisted monument out of the dark water was the massive weeping tree, its long, drooping branches swaying softly in the dead air. A profound, unnatural chill radiated from the water, sending an immediate wave of goosebumps down my arms. I stared at the tree in pure disbelief, realizing that Evelyn had read the hidden landscape of our town perfectly, without ever stepping foot inside Pine Ridge. We didn't waste a single moment to double-check the landscape, completely confident because this path was etched deeply into our childhood memories. To reach Oliver's old house, navigating past this exact concrete footbridge was completely unavoidable, with the dark factory wall flanking us on the left and the massive weeping tree guarding the right bank. Although we had frequented this path in our youth, we had abandoned it entirely ever since Oliver's passing, too terrified of the lingering shadows. We arrived at the footbridge at precisely 6 in the evening. Nathan pulled his motorbike onto the grass, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We have to finish building the stilt frame before the twilight fades entirely," he muttered, pointing toward the crimson sky. Todd voluntarily volunteered to descend into the murky creek, being the most physically daring among us, while Nathan stayed on the concrete slab to pass down the heavy lumber. We had prepared a set of sturdy structural timber posts to support the altar frame. Evelyn had explicitly commanded us, "When you anchor the stilt shrine into the riverbed, you must never allow the offering platform to sit lower than the concrete pathway. You must elevate the structure significantly above the footbridge, keeping it at eye level with the living." We kept her strict instructions in mind, aligning the wooden beams to stand nearly a meter high. However, the dark creek proved treacherous. The moment Todd plunged his boots into the black water, the soft mud gave way completely. The structural timber posts sank deep into the mire, and within seconds, the freezing, foul water rushed up past Todd's waist, nearly reaching his collarbone. "The current is too thick and the riverbed is completely hollow," he shouted, his teeth chattering violently from the sudden chill. The sun was dipping fast, and the safe daytime window was rapidly closing. We yanked the sunken timber posts back up, and Nathan frantically grabbed additional reinforcement beams, hammering them together with heavy iron nails to extend the altar's legs. Elliot held our dim flashlights steady, his hands shaking so violently that the beams danced erratically across the dark water, illuminating the foul black slime coating the banks. Nathan leaned over the bridge edge, desperately grasping Todd's arms to steady the frame. But every time Todd hammered a nail, the wooden joints twisted out of alignment, the structural timber cracking under the frantic pressure. Our calculations were completely short-circuiting. Nathan was a meticulous builder, yet today, every simple joint failed, throwing our entire operation into a state of chaotic, messy frustration. By the time we finally managed to stabilize the elevated wooden platform, night had fallen completely, erasing the safe daytime window Evelyn had explicitly commanded us to maintain. The heavy autumn twilight had dissolved into a pitch-black, suffocating dark. The only illumination came from the narrow, flickering beams of our 2 cheap flashlights, which cut helplessly through the oppressive shadows. Todd managed to scramble back onto the concrete footbridge, his entire lower body soaked in the freezing, foul creek mud. Nathan quickly began arranging the offerings onto the newly constructed platform, while Elliot grabbed the traditional multicolored satin sashes, blessed ritual fabrics used in spiritual practices to bind positive energies and designate a structure as a sacred shrine for wandering souls. Nathan tightly wrapped the sashes around the central timber posts. At the exact millisecond the fabric was tied, an explosive, heavy sound rattled across the bridge. It was the distinct sound of frantic running footsteps pounding against the concrete path. Took, 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 took. The footsteps were incredibly fast, sounding exactly as if someone was charging directly at us from the deep darkness of the lane. Terror instantly locked my joints. I instinctively ripped my flashlight beam away from the wooden shrine, yanking the light down the path to confront whatever was sprinting toward us. The beam cut through the dark lane, illuminating absolutely nothing but empty air. But before I could breathe a sigh of relief, a massive, explosive splash erupted from the creek directly to our right. It sounded exactly as if a heavy adult body had plunged violently into the stagnant water from the exact spot where the phantom footsteps had suddenly cut out. I frantically whipped the flashlight beam down toward the water. The ink-black surface was churning violently, creating aggressive, widening ripples that slapped against the muddy banks, yet there was no physical object or creature in sight. In that exact microsecond, an unnatural, catastrophic gale-force wind slammed into the footbridge from all directions, as if the entire orchard had woken up in total fury. The branches of the colossal weeping tree directly above our heads began to thrash violently, sending a massive shower of dry leaves raining down upon us, burying our circle in absolute chaos. The violent gale roared around us, and the freezing water below continued to churn with unseen force. Through the cascading shower of falling willow leaves, Todd screamed at the top of his lungs, "Pull me up! Get me out of here right now!" His desperate voice broke our paralysis. Elliot and Nathan lunged forward, grasping Todd's mud-slicked arms, and with a collective, frantic heave, they hauled him out of the black creek onto the narrow concrete footbridge. His body was trembling violently, coated in foul slime. Our focus instantly shattered into pure, disorganized panic. The nighttime window had caught us completely off guard, and the supernatural oppression was driving our minds to the absolute edge of madness. We frantically began pulling the traditional fruit offerings out of our bags, placing them onto the wooden platform in total disarray. But when Nathan reached into his backpack to grab the ritual sticks, his face fell into complete despair. "Where are the incenses, John? Did you bring the pack?" he shouted over the roaring wind. "I swore I had packed them," but as I searched through my own canvas bag, my sweat-slicked fingers found absolutely nothing. The dim flashlights flickered weakly, illuminating only tiny fractions of the muddy bridge, leaving the vast darkness surrounding the weeping tree completely hidden. Nathan stepped between us, his face hardened with sudden authority. "Everyone, stay completely calm. Circle together, drop to your knees, and press your foreheads close. We have to shield the match flames with our own bodies." We dropped into a tight knot, using our backs as a human barricade against the unnatural wind. After several failed, frantic strikes, a match finally caught, and we ignited the heavy bundles of incenses, handing 7 glowing sticks to each trembling member of our circle. Holding the smoking sticks toward the shadows, I shouted into the wind, pleading for forgiveness from the Crossroads entity we had violently bound to our lives years ago during that foolish teenage ritual. I formally asked the presence to release its permanent containment on our circle, take up residence inside the newly constructed stilt shrine, and grant an absolute absolution, a formal spiritual release from a dark debt or curse, dissolving the karmic bond entirely, so that Adrian's soul could finally break its bondage and cross peacefully into the afterlife. The moment the final prayer for absolution left my lips, an uncanny phenomenon occurred. It was as if someone had instantly switched off a massive power generator. The violent, howling gale vanished into absolute nothingness in a fraction of a second. The churning, mud-choked water in the creek froze into a mirror-like stillness, even though the violent ripples from a moment ago were still physically fresh in our minds. The crushing weight of the supernatural atmosphere dropped instantly, leaving us standing in a jarring, hollow quiet that felt completely surreal, like waking up from a frantic nightmare. We stood there shivering on the concrete pathway, looking at each other through the dim flashlight beam, entirely unable to comprehend if what we had just witnessed was real. Todd was still dripping wet, shivering from the foul creek water, his skin covered in gray silt. The scattered remnants of the fruit offerings lay on the wooden platform, completely undisturbed now. Our plastic flashlights, one of which had dropped during the panic, cast a solitary, trembling beam onto the newly tied satin sashes. "What do we do now?" Elliot whispered, his voice shaking so violently it was barely audible in the dead silence. Nathan, recovering his composure first, adjusted his grip on his keys and muttered, "We get out of here immediately. Grab whatever equipment we can carry, leave the offering altar exactly as it is, and do not look back." Todd, still highly disoriented, looked at the remaining food baskets and asked nervously, "Shouldn't we perform a formal conclusion prayer to dismiss the offerings? What if we anger them by leaving it messy?" I snapped at him, my patience completely frayed by terror. "Are you out of your mind? Do you actually want to stick around to eat the ritual leftovers? Move!" My sudden aggression broke their hesitation. We formed a tight, protective cluster, walking with our backs almost pressed together as we moved toward where our motorbikes were parked. We cast our remaining flashlight beam ahead to illuminate the narrow concrete path. As we walked, a sickening sensation crept down my spine. The narrow light beam revealed a terrifying visual distortion near the massive weeping tree. It felt exactly as if a fourth person was standing motionless in the shadow of the roots, refusing to step forward with us. I frantically counted the figures walking beside me: Nathan, Elliot, Todd, and myself. We were all accounted for. Yet Elliot suddenly froze, staring into the darkness of the willow branches, his eyes widening as he muttered, "Wait, if all 4 of us are walking right here, who is that still standing back by the shrine?" The terrifying question hung in the air for a fraction of a second before total panic overrode our restraint. We didn't answer. We broke into a frantic sprint, our boots pounding against the concrete pathway as we scrambled onto our motorbikes. I remembered Evelyn's ultimate warning: once the ritual is complete, no matter what screams, footsteps, or phantoms manifest behind you, you must never turn your head to look back. I slammed my foot onto the Kickstarter, ignited the engine, and roared down the desolate lane. staring rigidly at the dirt road ahead, refusing to let my eyes drift toward the rearview mirror, as the shadows of the Blackwood orchard faded into the distance. The days following our terrifying midnight escape from the Weeping Willow Bridge passed in a state of hyper-vigilant exhaustion. We didn't dare speak of the third figure standing near the roots, yet the psychological grip of the Crossroads entity finally seemed to loosen its iron hold over our surviving circle. A few days after the ordeal, seeking a final measure of spiritual security, I placed a frantic call to Evelyn. Her calm, sacred voice came through the receiver, and I immediately blurted out an update on our desperate midnight ritual, asking anxiously if we had done everything right and if the wandering entity and Adrian's restless phantom had truly settled into their new neutral altar. Evelyn let out a soft, contemplative sigh from the other end of the line, pausing for a long moment before answering my anxious inquiries. She confessed gently, "To be entirely honest with you, John, I am not entirely certain whether my words or your makeshift shrine were fully adequate to appease them. The outcome of such deep spiritual confrontations ultimately rests on unseen karmic scales, and whether they chose to forgive your youthful desecration is something only time can reveal. However, you did what was required to offer restitution, and the heavy, concentrated malice that was actively tracking your bloodline has retreated into the quiet." She instructed me to clear my mind, let go of the lingering terror, and perform a series of dedicated merit-making ceremonies, a traditional devotional practice of performing good deeds, acts of charity, and prayers dedicated to transferring positive spiritual energy to deceased friends and wandering souls. She advised us to envision the stilt shrine not as a tether to our past mistakes, but as a permanent sanctuary that officially ended their nomadic suffering. I thanked her profusely, feeling an indescribable wave of relief wash over my chest as the phone clicked shut. Over the next few weeks, I made it a point to quietly re-establish a sense of normal daily routine, though the invisible scars from that December night in Pine Ridge would forever remain etched into my soul. Yet, the supernatural world is never truly finished with those who dare to cross its invisible borders, and a final, haunting revelation awaited me in the quiet hours of sleep. A few days after my conversation with Evelyn, I finally decided to write down this dark chronicle and share it as a public post on my social media timeline, purely as an open reflection on how far life had taken our old circle. I didn't expect much to come of it, but within hours, local acquaintances and old schoolmates from Pine Ridge began reacting and commenting, sharing fragmented stories of how they too had occasionally walked past the dual stilt shrines by the murky creek or even offered small prayers there for general fortune. But the true, lingering manifestation came in the quiet, heavy hours of the night, when sleep finally dragged my weary consciousness under. In my dream, the oppressive, choking fog of the Blackwood orchard parted completely, and I saw Adrian standing right in front of me. He wasn't trapped in the dark mire, and he wasn't wearing his old worn-out sports jersey. Instead, he was dressed neatly in casual travel clothes, flashing that familiar, arrogant, yet completely peaceful smirk he always wore back when we used to lounge around his family home. He didn't say a single word, but his eyes conveyed a profound, undeniable sense of understanding, as if he had somehow read my words on the digital screen, knew that we had finally done what was necessary to put his tormented phantom to rest, and had come to offer a final, wordless goodbye before dissolving back into the clear light. Waking up in a cold sweat in the dark, my heart hammered against my ribs, but the suffocating pressure that had choked my chest for over 30 years felt miraculously lifted. It was a bizarre, chilling realization that even the dead can perceive our modern digital footprints, and that true closure sometimes arrives in the quietest, most unexpected corners of our subconscious. As I sat in bed staring at the dim moonlight cutting through my bedroom window, the full, tragic weight of our youthful recklessness came crashing down upon my mind once more. We had started out as a group of 8 innocent, incredibly bored teenagers, simply seeking a cheap, thrilling adrenaline rush on a quiet, forgotten street corner. We didn't realize at the time that playing with the unknown, using a handmade letterboard and a fragile glass piece, was a form of spiritual trespassing, an unauthorized intrusion into the unseen metaphysical realms where invisible, predatory entities wait eagerly for careless, arrogant minds to open the door. And once that spiritual door is forcefully opened, the cosmic and karmic consequences do not simply vanish just because you grow up, move to another city, or try to bury the memory with alcohol and music. They linger in the forgotten corners of your hometown, waiting patiently for your weakest, lowest vibrational moment to strike, reminding you forever that some games are played with your very soul on the line. Reflecting on this chilling journey, I hope the dark lessons of our past serve as a stern caution to anyone tempted to seek cheap thrills through the occult. Playing with forces beyond our understanding leaves deep, invisible scars that time alone cannot erase. As I bring this extended chronicle to a close, I also want to share a bit about where life and art have taken us since those turbulent adolescent days in Pine Ridge. While our old rock band, the Blue Anchor, eventually saw its members drift toward individual creative paths, my incredible bandmates continue to make their mark in the professional music industry. Our lead guitarist touring and recording with legendary mainstream artists, our drummer keeping rhythm for prominent pop and rock acts across the country, and our bassist still holding down the groove on major stages. As for myself, while music remains a lifelong passion, including voicing award-winning melodic compositions and cultural television theme tracks for major public broadcasting networks, my primary professional vocation today is working as a dedicated lead designer at a creative studio in the city, where I am grateful to be a humble assistant to my wonderful wife who runs our enterprise. Speaking of artistic endeavors, I am deeply honored to invite anyone who appreciates our journey to join us for a very special upcoming live concert event scheduled for the 19th of December this winter. We will be performing live on stage, accompanied by a magnificent, full symphonic orchestra at the Grand University Auditorium, blending our acoustic and rock sensibilities with orchestral arrangements for a truly unforgettable evening. If you would like to attend or witness this unique collaboration, please feel free to reach out and connect with me directly through my official social media profile under my birth name, Naokorn Poonporn, or simply search for my artist moniker online, where we can share ticket details and stay in touch. Before we sign off completely tonight, I want to extend my most heartfelt gratitude to our wonderful host for giving me the platform to share this vulnerable piece of my past, to all the loyal listeners and community members who tuned in to ride this dark wave of nostalgia with us, and to our generous sponsors who make these late-night broadcasts possible. Remember, listeners, that the invisible boundaries of our world are thin, and while closure is possible through forgiveness and peace, some doors are best left firmly locked. Thank you all so much for listening. Stay safe out there, and good night.